So for everyone, we are going to record the session in order to share it later to all participants and also to those not able to join today. Okay. Emily, just a question. Yes, okay. The session is shared. Okay, so we are going to start slowly. So I'm Carole Homey. I'm in charge of ICS, Initiative for Compliance and Sustainability. We are really pleased to have you in this webinar session held together with the ILO, International Labour Organization, for this specific webinar. So thank you so much, Emily, and thank you to all participants being connected for this challenging technical event. And sorry for the few minutes taken in order to start the meeting. So we are really pleased to partner with the ILO for this event, and more than happy about the partnership being built with the SCORE program and the Help Desk and Enterprise Department in this so important organization. ICS is an international multi-sectorial initiative with the aim to enhance working conditions along the global supply chain of its members. ICS is composed of 48 multinational retailers and brands in the sectors of textile, retail, footwear, electronics, and furniture, which market goods to end consumers with comparable risk inherent to their production chain, regardless to the regulatory context in which these members operate. For instance, in France, the duty of vigilance law depends on the size of the company. ICS collaborates with stakeholders to foster synergies between private and institutional actors. ICS enables members companies to collaborate with shared tools. Some of you have already experienced ICS audits, and in order to mutualize audit results in order to help reducing the number of repeated audits in factories. ICS members share the knowledge, challenges, and best practices in a competitive environment. After these assessments, ICS members undertake, in accordance with the business relationships with the audited factories, to implement the measures defined in the corrective action plan. The duty of vigilance is a path towards progress in transparency and accountability across global supply chains. A combined approach of audits and close cooperation with production plans to corrective action. Thank you to mute if you are not talking. Okay, great, thank you. So it helps make supply chain management more sustainable. To complement these actions, capacity building and training projects can be carried out in partnerships with ICS stakeholders, including the ILO, to strengthen the knowledge and improve practices of production sites, managers, and workers. Today, the world is facing an unprecedented situation that may affect all stakeholders worldwide, from brands to supplying entities, and everyone is aware that this major crisis requests resilience everywhere. We thank you very much, ILO, to share today the views and recommendations to strengthen your actions. And we thank you so much to be available for this discussion that we hope to be really helpful in this difficult quizzes. Thank you very much to Emily and to the complete ILO team, and thank you very much also to our suppliers and brands to be online today. So, Emily, I will let you present this webinar with, in order to share some information and useful recommendation for restructuring for recovery and resilience in response to this current crisis. Thank you, Emily. You are on mute, Emily. I think so.
Okay, thank you so much, Carole, and thank you everyone for participating today. I'm looking forward to hopefully having a very interesting discussion, and I hope the insights that we have to share with you can be useful in your operations in dealing with such a difficult time. As Carole mentioned, I work at the ILO. I am a senior specialist in the enterprises department, and my job in the ILO is to manage the ILO Help Desk for Business. In this regard, I have ongoing conversations every day with companies around the world of various sizes in all sorts of sectors, talking about how to most efficiently implement principles contained in international labor standards in their company operations. So we're going to focus today on the labor standards principles regarding restructuring, but I'm happy to talk with you anytime about other issues that you might also be having. So let's start. Oops, happens, my computer is not advancing the slides. Okay. So as you know, COVID has had tragic consequences for the health and lives of millions of people around the world. We're up to over 15 million cases of COVID-19 and over 600,000 deaths, which is a tragedy in itself. But it's not just the health consequences, but also the economic consequences. Demand has been evaporating. Demand has been evaporating. You guys hit your mute button, please. Whoever is not muted. Thanks. Demand is evaporating. There are forced temporary closures. Even when companies are able to continue operating, they may have disruptions in their supply chain, so they're not able to produce the goods or services that they would like to at the level they would like to. And it's not just that this is problematic, but it has a negative downward spiral. Workers are being forced to stay home or being laid off, and then that causes them to not have income to be able to buy goods or services, or fearful that they may in the future not have income, so they stopped purchasing what's beyond what's really necessary, and that causes further closures, and it's really a potential long-term negative downward spiral. So what the ILO has been calling for, first and foremost, is government action, because this is something no one company or even sector can deal with, or even an initiative like ICS. It has to come first and foremost from governments to address the problem. So we've called for governments, together with employers and workers' organizations, to quickly implement measures to sustain enterprises through the crisis. Provide social protections to workers in need, so it puts a floor under the growth of poverty, so that there's not that continuous downward spiral, and to help develop a strategy for safely reopening economic activity. All of this should be done based on the most accurate scientific information at the time, and about how public health measures and what companies can do to make business decisions. Governments are to the occasion. They are taking steps to address things. But sorry, please, can you put the mute button on? Can everyone just look right now and mute? If you're not muted, mute your microphone, because it's really hard for me to talk when people are talking. Thanks. So even though governments are responding, they need, and doing the best they can, given perhaps their limited fiscal resources and limited policy options, they're trying. But nonetheless, there's still a crisis. One of the things I need to stress here is that in times of crisis like this, workers' rights are even more critical. Although a lot of people think instinctively, well, they're a luxury and this is not a time for a luxury. No, they're actually more critical. The potential of more and more people falling into poverty and creating that further downward spiral is exactly what we want to avoid. So the international labor standards, the principles are still relevant and even more critical to vulnerable workers. During Carol, can you physically mute the mics that is open of, I don't know who this person is, I see on the screen, but
yes,
yeah,
really.
Can you, thank you.
We're muting them, but they're
so
deactivating the mic.
Thanks.
Please, Mr. Sheriff, can you mute when you are not speaking, and keep the mute on, please?
Thanks so much, and sorry for the disruption, everyone. So international labor standards are there to protect workers in good times, but even more so in bad times. So all your guidance that you've been receiving around hours of work, wages, etc., those remain as relevant as ever to protect those workers, but also to prevent that further downward spiral. Labor standards are there not only to protect workers, however, they're also there to protect enterprises. You may not be familiar with the ILO. The ILO is a tripartite organization within the UN. It has government members, but also those government members bring with them to the ILO the most representative employers organizations and workers organizations, and they all together sit down and discuss, negotiate the text of the labor standards and adopt them together. So the interests of the enterprises are already built into the labor standards in the realm of sometimes direct rights addressed, identifying rights of employers, but also indirectly in identifying areas of flexibility that is critical for employers to be able to continue their operations and remain healthy and competitive, which is exactly what we want. We, meaning the ILO, but also the workers themselves, because that's where the jobs come from. So there are no workers' rights if there are no healthy and competitive enterprises. So the flexibility built into these labor standards is also more relevant than ever during a crisis. And the trick is to find good communication and trust between management and workers so that you can find the right balance that the needs of both the workers and the enterprises are met. So restructuring is exactly that same, finding the right balance, but focused on the issue of when a company may need to take measures in response to acute stress it is under. So there's undoubtedly going to be some stress because of the pandemic. And one of the main messages I want you to leave with is that restructuring can mean many things. It doesn't just mean dismissals or temporary dismissals of workers. There are other ways to adapt to the current environment that can be much more constructive, not just for workers, but for the enterprises themselves. What we're concerned about in the area of restructuring is minimizing harm to workers, but also enterprises. And when I mean harm to enterprises, I'm talking about the loss of skills, the psychological damage that's done to the workers who remain in employment. It's called survivor's guilt. that is a real phenomenon that happens to often decrease productivity in the process. Those sorts of consequences for enterprises we're also looking to minimize to the extent possible. So some of the ways you do this is by focusing on ways to strengthen trust and build morale and collaboration between enterprise management and workers, and avoid anything that erodes that in the process of restructuring. Having said that, I am fully aware, if this were my business and I was under acute stress because my buyer will not pay for an order that's been completed, or I have very few, if any, orders coming in right now, or my supply chain is completely disrupted because of all sorts of factors outside of my control, it would not be my first instinct to say, geez, I think I'll go talk to the workers. I would want to retain as much control as I can in this chaotic situation, and try and act as quickly as possible. And having dialogues with the workers is not going to help me react as quickly as possible. So my instinct would not be to talk to the workers, even though I come from the ILO. And I can appreciate that's not necessarily your first instinct either. But we're going to talk a little bit about what exactly we mean by engaging with the workers, and walking through some of the possible options to discuss with them, to try and convince you that it may be, even if it takes more time and it takes more energy, it might be very much worth that investment to have better outcomes both for the workers and for your enterprise. So step one is information and consultation. What we're trying to do here is get everyone on the same page to understand what the problem is and what are the concerns of everyone involved. So the first part of it is sharing relevant information with the workers or the representatives. They don't have all the information you have. It's not the case that you can share all information with the workers, but you can keep them updated on issues around that affect them, around what are the chances of another shutdown, what are public health measures that are being implemented, what are government expectations around reduced operating, things like that that can help you build a shared understanding of what the challenges are, to the extent it's possible for you to share information about lost orders. I know that's very sensitive information, but giving them a more accurate picture of the company will help put everyone on the same page and start to build empathy between you as management and workers, to the extent that's possible. But also to explore together measures around wage subsidies, loan guarantees, allowances for affected businesses, to the extent you're operating in a country where they have the fiscal space to do that, or there are private alternatives. It's an important step in sharing information as well. To the extent you can, present a true picture of the enterprise, even if it may be your instinct to say, I don't want to give them the bad news because then maybe all of them will leave sooner than I'm ready and go to my competitor. And that's completely understandable. But to the extent that you feel you can be more honest and candid with them, it will help, again, build that trust that's going to be really critical for the resilience in getting through a restructuring. Concerning safety and health measures, to the extent you already have a safety committee, it's important to use it, and that could be a springboard for a broader dialogue platform around broader issues like reduced hours or wage cuts, etc. Build on what dialogue structures you already have. And a lot of these issues are not just at the enterprise level, but at the whole sector level. So being engaged in your employer's organization, encouraging your workers to the extent they're already organized to become more involved at the sectoral level, they can be sources of information and inspiration for you and how you deal with the crisis going forward in a collaborative way. The consultation part of this is really about listening to each other's concerns. You expressing the realities you as business people are facing in your operations, but also listening to the concerns of workers. Some of them will be rather obvious. How am I going to pay my rent next month if I'm laid off? Those sort of things. But others may be about, well, I'm actually worried about my very sick parents, and I would rather take unpaid leave and go and stay with them. You might be surprised at how wide the range of concerns are, and they're not just narrowly focused on maybe one or two things that you might think that they're focused on. So this is a chance for everyone to understand each other's concerns and issues, and to have a genuine exchange that helps them pave the path for identifying the most effective ways forward. If there are any collective agreements that exist, and obviously within the limits of the law, we're talking about solutions that are legal and consistent with pre-existing commitments, but the dialogue should be guided by those. And as I said before, the idea is to be able to open up your horizons, to identify possible solutions that you may not have realized are a possibility, as well as building trust in each other. So now we're going to watch a video. I hope the audio works, because I had a notice before that I'm no longer sharing the audio. So Carol, if you can let me know if this doesn't work, but I'll just hit the play button. We're going to watch a video of a small enterprise that is part of the ILO SCORE program that you may be familiar with, and how they are dealing with COVID-19, management and workers collaborating together on finding creative solutions to get through the crisis.
The sound is really bad.
Okay, so I think I need to unshare and reshare my screen.
Thank you.
So hopefully it will work again this time. Okay. Oops. Sorry. I need to go back one. Let's see if it works now.
Sorry, it's not
okay.
Okay.
Okay. Let me try it one more time. And
hi, I'm Maria from Spa Factory Bali. We are a cosmetic company, and we specializing in spa products, hotel amenities, and villas amenities, and also premium retail items. 75% of our clients are related to tourism industry. They are hotels, villas, or spas. The COVID-19 has been giving a very big impact to our tourism industry in Bali especially. In the month of March, our sales has decreased by 80%, and the number is not getting better.
Voice is very bad.
Most of the hotels have decided to close temporarily. To make it even worse, most of our hotels has quite a big
voice is very less. I can hear.
Agree. Voice is very less.
Sorry for that, but it seems to have an issue with the sound right now. Can we try again, Emily, please?
To share. Okay. Hopefully.
it was okay with the sound.
See here? Is it better?
Sound is
No.
good.
Sound is good now?
Yes, it is good now.
Okay.
Oh, okay, shoot. Okay, we'll try it again. Hopefully, I think
Of March, we already gathered all of them. We discussed about the situation, and we even talked about the worst case scenario depending on our financial situation. We have been very lucky because we have one product that we produce that are currently using 50 months. It is the hand sanitizer.
Sound is still very less.
And quickly we make a decision to really push the sales of the hand sanitizer.
Oh, sorry. I'll try it one more time, and then if it doesn't work, I'll just summarize Maria's case for you, okay?
That's fine.
Thank you. It seems not okay now.
It's not okay?
No, maybe it depends on the network.
Okay, well then maybe I'll just summarize Maria's case.
We can hear you clearly, but as soon as the video is occurring,
Yeah.
the voice is coming down.
Okay, well, why don't you watch, I'll tell you about Maria's case, and then you can watch it at your leisure afterwards, because you'll get the slides, and it has the link in the slides, okay?
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so Maria is the owner of Spa Factory Bali, which is a cosmetics company, a small SME, a relatively small one. It has, I think, about 50 people. That produces lotions and creams and oils and stuff that are going into 5-star and 4-star hotels in Bali. You know, when you get those little samples, her company produces those little bottles of shampoo and lotions and stuff. And obviously hotels are decimated. The tourism industry is decimated in Bali. So they had to think of a way to quickly transform. Part of it, fortunately, is they were able to quickly move into hand sanitizers, because that's similar to their regular production. But part of it also was working with the workers. They developed different schemes to expand their product line and expand their distribution. So one of the schemes is that workers can buy the products at cost, more or less, or with a substantial discount, and then they can sell them or distribute them through their family networks. It's not an obligation to, but it's an option for them to. So they've been able to expand the way they distribute a more person-to-person rather than through businesses, but also through their businesses, they have pivoted to focusing on more health-related and immune system boosting that were some of the ideas coming out of workers that could create products that could be sold to health food stores, to regular grocery stores, to small community shops, so that they're not dependent on the hotels for their business. And so they did that together with the workers. The workers were, you know, retrained to do some stuff. A lot of the ideas came from them. So the bottom line is that, and she was able to do this because there was a lot of trust between the workers and Maria and her senior management team to be able to make changes that weren't scary to people. There were some jobs lost or some transition, but it was in a constructive way that didn't do a lot of harm to the workers, and actually has been what Maria thinks will be a longer term benefit to her business, because now she is not so dependent on just one way of distributing her products. Like I said, please, I encourage you to watch the video. I know, unfortunately, we did a test I promise you, we did tests yesterday to make sure everything would run very smoothly today, but clearly, well, it didn't work out. But anyway, so that's an example of dialogue and speaking with the workers instead of just saying, oh no, I've lost my customers, I can't go on, I'm going to have to start firing people. Maria was able to pivot very quickly. So, I don't know what's happened, but I'm kind of in. So what does this mean for your company undergoing a similar exercise? You've already done the information and the consultations, so you have a shared understanding of what the situation is and understanding of what each other's concerns are. Now it's time in step 2 to identify what your options are. Every country is different, every sector is different, so it may be that you don't have many of the options that are listed here, but for the sake of completeness and to encourage you to make sure that there aren't these options, even if you think there aren't, there may very well be, to encourage you to explore all of these possibilities to see if they exist for you. One is public wage subsidies or other financial assistance to retain staff. Shifting to virtual markets, or in the case of Maria, expanding physical markets in other ways where possible to access customers. Revamping or repurposing production. I saw in some of your pictures, your videos as you were logging on, a lot of clothing in the background and mannequins. I gather at least some of you, if not many of you, are in the garment production sector. Obviously, masks are a big issue right now, and there's sort of a competition to who has the most stylish masks, so maybe that could be a possibility. But other services or, there are many things that are needed right now to address COVID-19. Perhaps less in Asia and some of your countries, but exploring those options in dialogue with workers is a really important step. Internal redeployment, I don't know how small your companies are, but to the extent that demand for certain products has collapsed, but they could be redeployed to other places within the company to ramp up production there is an important option to explore. External redeployment, meaning that workers are temporarily given a contract with another employer while you've suspended the contract, so that they can keep working, but they still have a tie to you and a mutual commitment to go back when things get better. Retraining, if you haven't considered the SCORE program, for instance, this might be a good time when you have much more slack production to undertake that sort of training. But other sorts of training, if you were thinking of upgrading a production process, introducing lean production, for example, maybe this would be a good time to make that sort of investment if you have, if you can tap into resources to be able to cover the cost for that. But other options affect actual production schedules. So if those other options don't work for you and you need to start reducing your wage bill, to do it, and there are lots of different options to do that. Reducing hours or going allowing workers to go part-time, encouraging them to go part-time, or imposing part-time work. Being flexible about job sharing if workers want to not be fired altogether, but are willing to share a job and allow them flexibility around that. Other forms of flexible working time arrangements, especially if a lot of your impediments are around the public health requirements to reduce the physical, to keep physical distancing and therefore reduce the number of people producing at any one time. to be flexible around that, to be flexible around leave arrangements if people want to use their annual leave now, or take twice as much leave at half pay. Those sorts of options, if they're agreeable to the workers, or if they're willing, even if it's not the first choice of the workers, if they're willing to take that option rather than lose their job altogether. And to the extent that it's feasible, and maybe some of your admin staff to work from home, that's more in terms of complying with safety and health regulations. But there's also the issue of furloughs or temporary layoffs. The reason temporary layoffs are more preferable than permanent firing is for both sides. For the workers, although it's unfortunate to be laid off for a period of time, the psychological benefit of knowing that there's an arrangement that they will go back eventually when the business picks up is good for workers who might otherwise feel completely distraught and anxious about their future. And it's also good for management to keep a line with skilled workers they've already trained, they've already invested in, and to show that commitment that it's not, that COVID-19 is not being used as an opportunity to get rid of undesirable workers, but is an unfortunate situation in which the enterprise is being forced to reduce its wage bill, but there's still some sort of commitment there with the workers, if possible. If not, it's not possible. For all of these things, I need to stress, every situation is unique to you and your enterprise, and it's ultimately up to management to decide what is right for the company in the short term and the longer term. These are just proposals and a way of trying to figure out what is ultimately right for you. Another option is across the board pay cuts. And those are attractive for a lot of reasons, because everyone shares the pain. Typically, this includes not just workers, but management in the pay cuts. And it applies to everyone uniformly. So there's a sort of sense of fairness and solidarity to it. But the one thing I would caution you is to make sure that you're still complying with the law. If there's, if there has been no temporary waiver on the minimum wage, it should not drop below the minimum wage, or any existing collective bargaining agreements if they haven't been renegotiated. And in the spirit of solidarity, they should be, because what you're asking is for the workers to take part of the hard times, which means that when the good times return, or at least the better times return, things go back to normal. And if you've had a dispensation about the minimum wage and you've been paying below the minimum wage, your first priority should be to help the workers to recuperate the lost minimum wage that they should have been receiving. But as your company gets better, to also try and go back to what was the prior normal, because it shouldn't be a way of simply resetting downward permanently the workers' wages. But like I said, those are the caveats, but it is an attractive option in the sense that it spreads the pain that the company is going through evenly throughout the company. So it's a fairly popular measure. So looking into different options and deciding on what is the best way forward, as I stressed before, dialogue and discussion and consultation with the workers does not mean joint decision making. It's still your decision at the end of the day, and what you decide is up to you. But the way you should implement it is through first checking that you're in compliance with all laws and practices that are expected of you, and including what's in collective agreements. But also that the way you go about implementing your decisions, for instance, temporarily laying off workers, is done with objective criteria and not to discriminate. Again, the idea is that the crisis should not be an opportunity to punish or get rid of certain people you don't like for whatever reason. They're the wrong ethnic group, the wrong religion, the wrong whatever, or they're trade union activists who would like to organize your workers. Now is not the time to punish people. So that's why the criteria should be objective and not discriminate. But it's also for you as management, because the more objective and transparent the criteria are in how you arrived at your decision, how you're executing your decision, gives the workers more confidence and trust in you that you'll treat them fairly. Even if the decision is not one that they like, at least they will respect the decision, or at least more likely to respect the decision and not have negative consequences on how you are perceived as management. And to the extent possible, involve the workers or the representatives in the implementation. This is not to continue to further tie your hands, but because they can actually be an important go-between and ongoing support for workers who are traumatized because they've been laid off, or something in particular has happened to them, or they're a survivor and they're feeling guilty about their friend losing a job and them not losing a job. A lot of that ongoing support is going to be a drain on management if you're the only place they look for that support. So working with the workers in the implementation they become important allies for you if it's done effectively. And again, it's to preserve the positive relationship, because we want you to be strong and productive enterprises going forward in 2, 3, 5, 10 years. And building that foundation is critical for your business. As with any other management, you're going to need to manage the process, and that means in real time, evaluating it and making changes, fine-tuning as you go along, but also taking stock for deeper lessons to be learned to be able to address future crises. They might be health-related crises, the next pandemic. They might be market-related crises as the global economy continues to go up and down and fluctuate. But taking stock of the lessons that you're learning along the way and doing a debriefing after you've hopefully ridden out the COVID crisis will be useful learning, institutional learning for your organization going forward. So when layoffs or dismissals are unavoidable, and they almost certainly will be, in many of your operations, there are a few further things to deal with. And now I'm talking about permanent separations, that you cannot make any firm commitment to any of the workers that is entailed in a temporary layoff. These are more permanent layoffs. First of all, notify the workers or their representatives of what are the expected job losses, the categories of workers to be affected, the time frames involved, because you may be preparing for something that's coming in 2 or 3 months, but you want them to be mentally prepared for it now, and the options available to the workers. The goal is to give them information as early and directly as possible so that they can prepare themselves, because the worst thing is for workers to be caught off guard and to go into a sort of collective shock. You want to avoid that, and to support them as much as possible. And we're going to talk about how you can support them. So first of all, who ends up being their jobs being terminated? There are some guidelines around good practices. First, respect national employment legislation and any applicable collective agreements. So it may be, for instance, in your country, there is a legal rule about a last in, first out. So firing first the ones with the least seniority. If that's the law, you have to respect the law. or if it's in a collective bargaining agreement, that sort of thing. Use objective criteria. Again, this is not the opportunity to get rid of the less desirable people from a biased point of view. But it's perfectly legitimate for you as an enterprise to hang on to your most valuable workers from a justifiable commercial point of view. So if they're higher skilled, if they have better qualifications, if they have better training and experience, if they are simply more productive, if they have more potential for a future team leadership role, those are all legitimate grounds for keeping the worker. If again, it's because a worker is pregnant and she's about to go on maternity leave, that is not the time to choose her simply because she's pregnant and you're punishing her for being pregnant. So it's really important to keep your eye on the fairness of the process while also keeping in mind what your needs are as an operation that are legitimate. And you're allowed to weight the criteria. So someone can be younger and less experienced, but still be exceptionally productive. And that's okay to want to hang on to that person. That's a legitimate, and you can weight the criteria that meets both the needs of the employers and workers. And setting out a list of criteria that as a shared understanding will help tremendously in the transparency of the exercise. But again, do not use any criteria that are discriminatory. The person's age, whether they be a rather old worker or a relatively young worker, if they have more or less the same experience as everyone else in that place, in your place of operation, then they shouldn't be picked on simply because they're younger or older, or because a woman is married and you're assuming that, well, she's married, her husband will take care of her. Those are not legitimate grounds. So please bear in mind that it's, again, not an opportunity to get rid of people that you would rather not work there, but to think about the long-term interests of the enterprise and the workers there. Clearly communicate the criteria, and those workers who are finally identified as the ones who will be fired, it's important that it's done in a very sensitive way, not just a list of names posted. These are the people who are going to be fired, or even slightly less painful, but still not okay, the list of workers who will be retained with the implication that everyone else is fired. It's something you need to be done sensitively and directly with those workers, because it's a very stressful time for them, but also because there's more to your obligations to try and identify ways that you can support them. So that will entail conversations with them. So what are the ways to support workers who have been identified their jobs to be cut? Well, first and foremost, as you can imagine, what's going through their mind is, how am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to buy food for my family? How am I going to meet other basic needs when I no longer have an income? So to the extent that it's possible, and certainly to the extent that it's required by law or very strong customs in the location where you're operating, you should pay a severance allowance or severance package where possible, to help them at least short term. It's not a long-term remedy, but it can make a huge difference short term, whether the family becomes homeless or not, for instance. You can also find ways to identify, if they are older workers who are being cut, who might otherwise qualify for a government pension. You can explore the possibility. There are some public policy measures that have been put in place to allow for earlier retirement of older workers in response to COVID-19. You should explore those options in the public sphere with public schemes, but also any private schemes that exist to help with addressing income support, and include phased retirement where workers commence working fewer hours. There's also the longer term transition of these workers, and to the extent that you are able to, you may not be able to, but to the extent that you're able to help them in that longer term transition. So examples of that are establishing mechanisms for priority rehiring that doesn't make a firm commitment to them the way temporary layoffs do, but gives them a sense of what their prospects are longer term in the firm as it's recovering. Just so they're clear where they stand with your organization, but also provide, and that would entail things like skills assessment of future opportunities. If you're a very small enterprise, these are not relevant, but if you're a medium-sized enterprise with, say, 300 or 400 staff, this could be a possibility for their longer-term prospects in your enterprise. But outside your enterprise, try to help them to the extent possible with their job search, providing advice and guidance, giving them tips. And you might be surprised at how much they're welcome, but this is an area where you could consult with the workers' representatives to see if this would be useful or not, or engaging them in actually supporting workers with their job searches, and making available support for interview techniques. And the most important one, to the extent that it's feasible and possible, allow workers to take time off without deductions in pay to attend interviews, because you will have hopefully given them some prior notice that within a month or within 2 months your job will be gone, and now is the time to apply for other jobs. And if they have an interview, and because the working hours of the other potential employer are the same as your working hours, to free them up to go to an interview without having to either lie to you and say they're sick or take time off unpaid, will help them through this stressful situation. There's also, you might not have thought of it, but there's also the possibility to help those of the workers who are willing to start a small business to do so. For instance, if you're in the garment sector and you have machines that are older and you are planning on replacing them, maybe you could either lend or give them one of the older machines so they can start a small business out of their home that could do stuff for, repairs or special sewing projects in their neighborhood, but also could eventually, if your business picks back up and you have spillovers with excess orders, they could become a business partner and absorb some of those spillovers on a subcontracted basis. Since you already know them, you have trust in them, etc. To the extent that you're a larger organization and you could help them with, being a full established organization with equipment and so forth, that would also be great. My guess is the last one is included in the standards, but if you have the ability to raise capital, you'll probably need it for your own enterprise. But to the extent that it's possible, we would certainly encourage you to do so. And last but not least, you should have a mechanism in place for workers who feel that they're being treated unfairly, either individually or collectively, to continue that conversation and continue the goodwill that you've tried to build up by letting them air their grievances and trying to address any legitimate grievances where there is a potential way of solving it. Some of them will just be, I'm angry that I've lost my job, and you can't do anything. But to the extent that it's something you can address, we obviously encourage you to do so. And having a mechanism in place to deal with grievances is really important. Last but not least, I have a slide discussing the responsibilities of buyers. This could be you as a small enterprise who is a buyer in your own right for things coming into your supply chain, but also those of you in ICS who are buyers or retailers who are placing orders, and now your orders have changed drastically because your your immediate forecasts have changed drastically. It's important for you to do a similar exercise with your suppliers, even though they're not your employees. They're your business partners, and you have a similar relationship and should want to have a similar level of dialogue and trust and communication, so that you will be able to weather this downturn and come out together as strong as possible. So that means reviewing the impact of your operations and anticipating what that means for your business partners, and entering into a meaningful dialogue about the impact of the changes that you are making now, or you're projecting to make in the coming months. Provide advanced notice and take measures to mitigate adverse effects where possible. Contributing where possible to temporary income support for affected workers, especially when there are mass displacements of workers and in economies in countries where the social protection systems are weak or non-existent. An example of that is that you may have heard about is COVID-19 global action to support the garment industry. This is an initiative that was introduced by the International Employers Organization and the International Trade Union Confederation, together with the Bangladeshi Garment Manufacturers Association and the Industrial. It's a global union federation in the garment sector. And the whole idea, and also involves buyers and retailers. And the whole idea is to find collective solutions that everyone contributes to out of a spirit of solidarity to prevent the entire collapse of the garment sector in Bangladesh and the further impoverishment of producers and workers there. It's trying to do its best. It actually works in collaboration with ILO, but the situation is not easy because the sector has been so greatly devastated in Bangladesh, and that is one of the most critical sectors for the survival of their economy as a whole. But it's an example of people coming together collectively and trying to work through issues in solidarity, rather than just cutting business ties with a supplier because you can't afford to, that business is dried up and you don't need them right now, but thinking long-term about how to keep good relationships with your suppliers. So, just very quickly, because time is getting late, the goal is to balance interests, and the best way to do that is work with your you as a supplier, to work with your workers, try and listen to each other, build a shared understanding, understand each other's issues, identify options of possible ways forward that work for both of you to the extent possible. And if job losses are inevitable, you didn't find other options before resorting to job cuts, to do that in a way that is as fair, as transparent, and as related to the business as possible, bearing in mind the cost to the workers and taking as many steps as possible to minimize the negative effects on workers, realizing that some will be inevitable. And concerning your business partners, do the same to the extent possible with your business partners. And last but not least, for further information, please consult our website, and that's the top website there, and the bottom website is for the help desk. If you have questions, like, Emily, I didn't understand what you were talking about, or we faced this situation, that's exactly what I'm there for, is to help you figure out what would be a fair and equitable way going forward, given the reality that you are facing. And so I welcome any questions or comments you might have. So thank you, and I'm open for any questions, and also sharing of experiences.
Thank you very much, Emily. It was really interesting. Maybe we have the time for a few questions, if you want to share your questions in the chat. Nina, have we received some questions? So please be sure that we will provide you with the complete support. We will send you the link to the slide, also to the video and the record of the session. So this will be shared through email just after, in few minutes, in few hours after this session. So don't hesitate to share any questions you can have right now to the chat.
Yes, it is not that are able to control. But even though we are explaining all those things to buyer brands as well as the auditors.
The sound is not really good.
Yeah,
So
could you
maybe you
provide it
can
up in the
mute.
chat? Could you please direct all your questions to the chat box?
Chat box
Yeah, just click on the chat box and then ask your question. I'll read it out loud. Please, thank you. So we have one question that has arrived in the chat box. So one was, will we get the presentation? Yes, it will be sent to you via email if you have shared your email. The recording will also be provided to you, and the link to download the PowerPoint slides. Another question was how a company can choose a good leader to help it not go lose. I suppose to not go broke. I imagine that's the meaning of the question. So I'll just leave Emily maybe to provide the answer. Thank you.
Okay, I am assuming when you say leader, you're talking about representative of the workers. I think. In the principle in the ILO is that the management does not choose the representative of the workers. It's the workers that need to have confidence in the person or persons who are representing them. I would suggest it be more than one person so that you have some broader views and ideas, but also it allows you to sort of balance maybe if you choose only one, they'll pick. But if you have, say, 5 workers representatives that sit around with senior management in your company to discuss the way Maria did in the video, she had, I think, 3 workers representatives. Then they can represent different types of workers or different parts of the workers. They can be either by age difference or ethnic group difference or gender difference or function in the enterprise difference. You know, like the cloth cutting people are different than the people who sew, etc. So you can think about how many workers representatives you want to have to interact with. But once you settle on that number and given some kind of general guidance to the workers about how they should choose, it's ultimately should be up to them to choose their workers representative, because they really need to have confidence that this is not someone simply echoing what management wants to hear because they want to save their own job and they don't particularly care about their colleagues. So that's the risk if you unilaterally decide, well, this is going to be our workers representative. It probably won't work as effectively as you might hope. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you for your email addresses. So as Cécile has put in the chat, if you have already provided your email address via the forms that we have sent you, we already have your email address. But if you have not, you can put it in the chat. We can also see that there are some people that have their hands raised, but are not asking questions. So I have about 10-ish people raising their hands. Could you please put your, okay. So we have a question. So during COVID-19, brands are insisting on performing social compliance audits. But considering the poor manpower strength and continuous lockdown, they cannot perform them. Could you please clarify?
Well, if it's health and safety issue, and they're simply not allowed into the premises. I don't know if the question was, should audits be conducted during the lockdown, or what is the best way? So I'll answer both of them. Whether they should, like I said, workers' rights still need to be respected, and hopefully it won't be such a disruption, or you can figure out together a way to do it that complies with safety and health provisions that are in place for wherever you're operating. And maybe you can negotiate with the audits to do some of them by Zoom, like the interviews and so forth. That could also be more effective in protecting the health of the workers as well. But I can't tell you, no, you should get a free pass from audits if indeed that's what the buyer wants to do. On the other hand, maybe the buyer would be open to a discussion if you explain what systems you've put in place to try and protect the workers' rights and honor their rights respect their rights during the crisis. That would give them some reassurance that they feel more comfortable postponing the audits. But that's sort of a decision between the supplier and the buyer. We don't have any international labor standards that govern audits, so I can't really give you anything other than general advice.
Maybe I can add on the top of that ICS has also adjusted the audit process. You can see on our external website some adjustment in order to postpone if the audit is not possible to do it in the right way. So complying to the normal rule of the audit process, and you have been requested also to answer the checklist by most of the buyers, member of ICS. You have received through the ICS database a request for sharing information about the implemented measure to prevent from the pandemic. So this is not completely an audit, but it can help to have a dialogue with the buyers regarding the implemented measures, and also to share any information about the layoff and the lockdown of your factories. So this has been done through the ICS database, and some of you have been also been requested to participate to an additional project regarding the workers' voice, and so this is completely organized with the buyers, so you can discuss directly with the buyers also. You are working with on this part.
Other people with
Emily?
Yes.
Emily?
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not at the comment box because the comment box was disabled in my using. Can you please open the comment box?
I don't have control of the.
No, maybe some seems to have some issue with some of you, so we can hear you well, so we can allow you to share your questions orally. So we are listening to you.
Okay. Okay,
Would
good.
you like to?
Do you like to share your question?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I want to ask questions.
What is your question?
Yeah, actually, I want to know. The ILO is any include in social accountability or whatever, maybe after COVID-19, what are the changes to ILO inclusion and to include of social accountability part after that after the COVID-19?
I'm not 100% sure I understood the question because of some crackling. Carol, did you understand the question? It's ILO's social accountability.
I understood that the question is about the adaptation of the ILO conventions in the coming months or years. It is planned to have some change in regarding the compliance rules or not. Do you have views on that?
Well, I should clarify, our international labor standards, they guide governments. Governments ratify international labor standards. It's simply that companies have looked to the international labor standards principles, like the principle of not using child labor in your operations. There is no ILO standard on that as it talks to a company, but how it talks to a government. And as I mentioned before, in times of crisis, the labor standards actually become more important, not less important, as people become more vulnerable. But we certainly are stepping up in response to the COVID crisis. Our efforts, we have ongoing efforts, but making them much stronger around the resilience of companies. So strengthening our programs on productivity improvement and change management and innovation that can help companies expand their horizons and have more of a buffer for when the next pandemic comes. So it's not a matter of reducing the rights of workers, but strengthening our efforts even more concerning companies that are facing these challenges, if that makes sense.
Hello, madam.
Hello.
Can you start voice, madam?
The sound is the sound is really good. It's really bad.
Yeah, the sound is really bad. If you have access to the chat box, please please send the question to the chat box if you have access. We have already received several. So if we could just say them out loud. We have so for example, one of the questions that we can see here is how can a company help their workers start their own business with smart investment and that is not expensive?
Yeah, one of the key things, I mentioned one example, but using what you have that you don't necessarily need anymore or you could afford to lend to them. Because one of the big challenges, the two challenges for any company starting, that you know very well, having started your own companies, is the ability not just to produce things, but to produce things in a structured, a managed way where you can deal with things like cash flow, marketing, basically all the elements of starting a business that are not going to be intuitive to one of your workers who was formerly a line production worker. He or she might be great at what they do, say, for instance, producing particular types of tools, or it's certainly more relevant for those of you in the garment industry because those are relatively capital non-intensive for a small entrepreneur to start up. But they need access to capital and know-how to manage a business. But the capital is the most important part. So to the extent that you have equipment that you could free up for them, but also the ability to either help them directly or indirectly through guiding them to different places where you learned how to become an entrepreneur. If it's a business development service that's sponsored by the government that you know of, that they might not know of, that they could tap into, that sort of thing. The expectation is not that you're suddenly a bank and you're making loans or making investments in lots of different enterprises, would-be enterprises, but that to the extent you can share your know-how, to the extent you can share capital that you no longer need, like equipment, and to the extent that you can point them in the right direction so that they can get more systematic support. Those are the sort of things that you can help them with. Just something as simple as knowing where you can get a micro loan to be able to buy a piece of equipment. It may be obvious to you, but completely not obvious to someone who has never ever done anything like try and start a business before. So you'd be surprised how much you know that could be helpful for them.
Okay, thank you so much, Emily. If you don't mind, there are other questions that if you could take.
Sure.
So, for example, we have a question from Divya. She says that it is really appreciated how progressively the ILO is thinking and also taking into account the business perspective and have provided some of the solutions to handle difficult situations. However, the kind of solutions being suggested also need the local government support on providing some leeway and the guidance. So what is the ILO's suggestion to such factories that do not have local government support on flexibility on laws? And how can the ILO come up with some of the flexibility guidance which can be considered to be acceptable?
Well, I'm definitely not encouraging you to break the law. Please don't take that from today's video. But to the extent that you can become involved in your employer's organization to advocate for more flexibility while not eroding workers' rights. Because, for instance, if you suddenly drop the age to enter the workforce to, say, 13, you're going to drive away your supplier or your buyers. So it's not just a matter of looking for flexibility within the limits of the law, but also within what are the provisions that buyers are looking for that might risk costing you customers. But trying to find more flexibility, part of it is lobbying your government as well. But part of it is the right way to say it. Trying to find within your sector, and I know it's not so obvious if you're in a cluster and all these people around you are your competitors, to look at constructive ways to work together. But for instance, a lot of initiatives that we have in these policy briefs, which if you're interested in learning what is the kind of guidance we're encouraging governments to take, what kind of measures, you can download them, they're on our website. But to be implemented they need to be implemented at sectoral level or at the national level, and that takes coordination. So a lot of it is trying to raise your voice collectively in whatever sector you're in whatever community you're in, to try and get more, I would argue less about flexibility and more about support from the government to try and help you. For instance, zero interest loans, especially through smaller microfinance providers, because maybe a lot of you have challenges accessing capital from bigger institutions. That sort of support. But again, I realize collective action is not that easy as well, because it's not very instinctive for you to get together and talk to each other about advocating for your collective interests. But that's what your employers' organizations are there for. So maybe drawing more on their support and pushing them more to advocate for your interests is another good. And collectively raising your voice, sorry, Carol, but vis-a-vis ICS and other initiatives like the Fair Labor Association, or if you're involved in Better Work, an ILO program, to make your voices known. That's an obsession, particularly of me, but of my department in particular, is that corporate social responsibility or responsible business is not just a matter of the buyers telling suppliers what needs to be done, but also trying to strengthen the voice of the suppliers to make known to the buyers what they need to do together to get those things done. And this is an example of raising your voice collectively. So I would encourage you, to the extent possible, to get involved with your local employers organization, to coordinate amongst yourselves and maybe have a more joint approach in your involvement in ICS, if that's feasible or possible, so that any initiatives or bigger institutions that you're involved in are aware of your constraints and can start to more systematically take them on board. Sorry, Carol, I don't know if I just gave you a big headache, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Emily. We have another question that's going to be directed to ICS. So we have a question coming from Samantha saying, during lockdown, if we don't pay the wages of the workers, then during ICS audits, will it be treated as non-compliance? Could ICS guide us on that? So Carol, could you please, thank you.
So, thank you for the question, Nina and Samantha. So during ICS audit, auditor will assess mainly if the wage payments are in line with local regulations. We first ensure to understand the local regulation, even temporary. So if the factories were legally required to pay the wages, even partially, and they do not meet the legal requirements, yes, it could result to a non-compliance. However, if there is a temporary regulation on this specific point, this will be taken into considerations. And of course, if the factory has some lockdowns that are completely regulated in the countries, this will be taken into account. So it really depends on the situation, and we cannot answer completely to the questions right now. It depends on the country and the situation. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Carole. Apparently, Divya has an addendum to the first question asked. She also says thank you for providing clear responses. She's asking if home working is being researched right now to have any more viable guidelines considering the pandemic situation.
I don't know off the top of my head. My guess is there is some guidance on COVID-19 for specifically home workers, but I'm not sure. But what I'll do is I will check on the ILO website, and we have two specialists who deal with the rights of home workers, and I will send the links to Carol, and she can send them to you, or she'll include them with the follow-up communication to you, or sharing the PowerPoint. Okay? Because I'm afraid to tell you the wrong thing. I don't want to just make up something. My guess is yes, there is, but I want to verify. I need to write that down so I don't forget.
Thank you very much, Emily, for that.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Emily. So to everyone who is participating, you will receive an email sending you the files, the recording, and the any additional material. So we have a question coming from Amin, asking if the company needs if they're applying for a grant, the company needs a guarantor to help its workers. So what can companies do that that don't have a guarantor? How can they survive? How can they deal with this?
Yeah, to get them over the fiscal crisis that they're facing. I don't have it really will be context specific. It's not really in the scope of the international labor standards, but in more general institutional support to enterprises. Depending on which country they're in, there could be special funds set aside. Some countries are focused particularly on smaller enterprises because they're afraid of all the job losses if many go under. But unfortunately, a lot of countries, they're focused mainly on the larger enterprises, partly because it's easier to channel money through the big institutions that lend to the bigger enterprises and let the smaller ones go under, hoping they'll reestablish after the crisis. So it depends on what country you're in. But in terms of guarantors, I really couldn't tell you other than checking with I would encourage you to check with your employer's organization about various sources of finance that are available, especially in the micro lending market. The problem is the fees that you might face, the interest rates you might face. But to the extent that you have no other alternative, I would encourage you to look at microlending institutions. But I'm sorry, I don't have any better answer than that. Maybe Carol has a better answer. I don't know.
So the question is quite complex and it's difficult to answer it because it depends really on the country and the support you can have directly for entrepreneurship also. So you can raise these questions locally and sometimes also with the brands and the buyers, but I think it's really a specific question. It's difficult to answer right now.
Okay.
Another question?
Yeah. So we have another question for ICS. So Carol, we have Eden Rose asking the COVID-19 checklist at the ICS platform. Few suppliers can access it properly, and even if they can log in, they cannot input their answer or documents on the platform.
It seems to be a specific issue you have with the platform, as we have already received hundreds of answers, and it seems to be okay for most of the suppliers. So you can send us an email to the external email address contact at icsasso.org, and we will investigate this specific issue in order to provide you the support if needed. But it should be solved in the coming days. Don't hesitate to share the specific issue you have with the checklist.
Okay, so I have sent the email address to which you can provide your questions. So it's in the chat box if you haven't heard it. We have another question. Is the ILO arranging any programs at country level to be prepared for any future perspectives?
Programs at country level, we have hundreds of programs at country level. Is there, the person who asked it, do you have a more specific type of program in mind? For instance, we're working with ICS on the SCORE program. Maybe Carol would like to speak more about that. It's a program to really help strengthen enterprises in terms of improving productivity and competitiveness, outreach to new markets and so forth. But we have lots of other programs as well that are targeted in very specific sectors and so forth. So maybe I'll let Carol talk about the collaboration between ICS and SCORE. And then in the meantime, if you have a very specific thing in mind, you can type it in the chat box again for Nina.
So thank you very much, Emily. Yes, we are partnering with the SCORE program in order to develop a specific training mainly about health and safety and about the organization within the factories to prevent health and safety issues. So there has been deployed first in China and Vietnam, and of course during the specific crises we have to arrange in other modalities. So the SCORE program has developed the training session also online. So in the coming months, we will propose also some specific trainings, mainly about health and safety issues, maybe later on working hours, and some programs have been also dedicated to the COVID-19 pandemic. You will be able to access some videos also on our external website provided by the ILO in the coming months.
Okay, we have received an answer from the person asking the question, so they are from Pakistan.
Okay. Well, we had a project in Sialkot. Maybe you were producing in Sialkot by chance. And it's managed with the local employers organization or the National Employers Organization. I'm not sure. I would have to give you further information on that. But it's coming to an end. It was funded by the Japanese government, but I think there may be an extension. but I can look for you for other projects in Pakistan that could help support enterprises. And my guess is there are a fair number. We have an ILO website that's specific for Islamabad. So if you Google ILO Islamabad, it will bring up our country office there, and it should have a list of all the programs and activities of the ILO in Pakistan. Oh, is that you, the questioners? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I hope this helps. So we have another question from Rose as well. So will the ICS and the ILO collaborate to provide health and safety training with regards to COVID-19 safety measures? So basically I could ask either Carol or Emily to go ahead.
Go, Carol.
We were discussing this with the SCOPE program, and we have not planned some dates to do so. We already know that you have also received a lot of recommendations. We have shared also the video and recommendation from the World Health Organization, and we have already also share some guidelines through the ICS database. You can see on your interface in the database that you have all the guidelines on that. Regarding some specific training session online, it's quite difficult to organize for everyone in every countries. So we will see in the coming months the need for that, and maybe we will organize it, but it's not planned right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Carol. I hope, Rose, this answers your question. We have another question coming up for the ILO. Could you give us an example of some organizations that could help workers start their business? Question by Ami.
Well, organizations, we have our actual own program, and if you were to contact me separately, Annie, in the ILO.org/business, you'll find the assistance, the email assistance@ILO.org for the help desk. If you tell me which country, I can put you in touch with our Start and Improve Your Business coordinator. We have a whole program on training for entrepreneurship, and depending on the country, I'll put you in contact with that national coordinator who could help you get training for yourself or for your workers if they're displaced, to get the sort of technical support on how to run a business. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, so Amin is from Morocco. He said it in the chat.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I heard Annie at first. I mean, sorry. Morocco, I'm pretty sure we have something, especially for women workers. I think we have a whole program on entrepreneurship for women. So if they happen to have a lot of women workers, but I will send Carol the link to the contact for entrepreneurship. I think the best thing, would be if you were to send me that email explaining exactly what you're looking for, who it involves. Is it women? Is it just regular, women and men mixed together in Morocco? And I will introduce you to the coordinator, and she can follow up with you. Okay, Amin?
Okay.
Hello.
So, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emily. I don't think we have some additional questions. Nina and Cecile, have you some questions?
So far, none in the chat box, but I think I hear somebody. So maybe somebody is trying to speak, but we can't really hear you very well. Just for the person trying to speak, could you please write it up in the chat box? We can't really hear you.
Okay, no. Okay.
Well, if you in writing, Carol, an email, I'm happy to continue the discussion offline, so no worries.
Thank you so much for your support, Emily, to this very great session with so many participants. We were underways following your very interesting presentation. So I think that we have addressed the first questions in the chat box. If we want to share some additional questions, don't hesitate to do so. We will provide you also with the support, the presentation, the video, and some external links that can be helpful also depending on the countries. So thank you very much for for having participated to this session. Thank you, Emily. Very interesting, very great session. Thank you. And so I think that we can close now the sessions, and we will send you everything in the coming days. Thank you.
Well, good luck, everyone, and thank you again. Bye-bye.
Good luck and take care. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Cécile.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.